What can I say? When you've got natural business instincts, success just follows, David announced to our anniversary guests, his champagne glass catching the restaurant's warm lighting. He paused for effect, his confident smile spreading across his face as our clients, employees, and family friends hung on his words. We all played our role. Sarah cared for the kids while I built this empire from nothing. The words hit me like ice water, each syllable landing with calculated cruelty. I stood frozen near the restaurant entrance, still holding the guest welcome packets I'd been organizing since noon, my chronic back pain suddenly forgotten as a different kind of pain shot through my chest. We all played our role, like I was some minor supporting character in the David Mitchell success story. Our family friends, the Johnsons, nodded appreciatively from table 3, clearly moved by what they perceived as David's humble acknowledgement of teamwork. Our business clients smiled approvingly. Mike, our business partner, raised his glass while his wife Jessica, David's secret affair partner, beamed with pride at the man she thought was a self-made entrepreneur. Not everyone's cut out for the pressure of real business ownership, David continued, warming to his theme. The financial decisions, the risk-taking, the strategic planning, that takes a special kind of mind. Sarah's always been more comfortable with home management, while I handle the heavy lifting of actually running a construction company. My hands started trembling, the welcome packets rustling softly. 5 years of systematic erasure delivered with such casual confidence that our guests looked genuinely touched by his apparent humility about our team effort. I mean, look what we've accomplished in just 5 years. He gestured expansively toward the anniversary banners I'd designed and ordered. Mitchell Construction, built through pure vision, determination, and business instincts you can't teach. The humidity in the restaurant seemed to intensify, making my arthritis worse as rage mixed with the physical pain already coursing through my joints. Mrs. Johnson actually looked misty-eyed. She had no idea she was witnessing the systematic theft of my $180,000 inheritance being rewritten as his natural business instincts. 5 years ago, I took every penny I could scrape together and bet it all on this dream, David announced proudly to our captivated audience. No investors, no handouts, no safety net, just pure entrepreneurial courage, paying off exactly like I knew it would. My breath caught in my throat. Every penny he could scrape together. My grandmother's inheritance, the $180,000 that had funded every tool, every truck, every early payroll, had just been completely erased from our company's origin story. Sarah understood that supporting an entrepreneur means stepping back and trusting the business mind to do what it does best, he concluded with practiced humility. And look where that faith in my abilities has gotten us. I walked slowly to our head table and set down the welcome packets, my hands steadier now, despite the arthritis pain. For the first time in months, I felt a strange, cold calm settling over me. What David didn't know, what he'd never bothered to discover in 5 years of taking credit for my investment, was whose name was actually on the business registration for Mitchell Construction. In my filing cabinet at home sat the documents proving my grandmother's money hadn't just funded his entrepreneurial dream, it had made me the legal owner of everything he was claiming to have built from nothing. Tomorrow, David would learn exactly what happens when you erase the business owner from her own success story. Tonight, I would let him enjoy his last few hours as the hero of a narrative that belonged entirely to me. After all, the business license he'd never bothered to read was about to rewrite his entire identity. The next morning, I was organizing business receipts in our home office when I heard David on the phone in the kitchen, his voice carrying that same confident tone from last night's speech. "No, Jessica, you don't understand," he was saying. "Sarah's never been involved in real business decisions. She handles the household stuff and basic filing, women's work, you know." Jessica. His affair partner calling at 9 in the morning, discussing my role in my own business. I stayed quiet by the office doorway, my hands steady on the expense reports I'd been systematically tracking for 5 years. The same reports David dismissed as Sarah's paperwork obsession whenever clients asked about our financial organization. "She has no idea what this company is actually worth," David continued smugly. 5 years, and she's never asked to see the business registration or partnership documents. She trusts me to handle everything important. My jaw clenched as I listened to him discuss the documents sitting 3 feet away from me in my organized filing system. Documents he'd never bothered to read carefully, assuming his daily management role meant automatic ownership control. The expansion I mentioned last night? Jessica, we can move fast on this. Sarah will go along with whatever I decide. She always does. I made coffee quietly, my mind racing while my hands performed the familiar morning routine. David had been planning business expansion, my business expansion, without consulting the actual owner. Can you meet me at the construction site this afternoon? I want to show you the property before we finalize the purchase. My mug nearly slipped from my fingers. He was buying property with affair funds, using business accounts I controlled through my legal ownership. Sarah will be out running errands. Perfect timing to walk through without complications. Complications. 5 years of marriage and partnership reduced to complications in his expansion plans with his girlfriend. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, each step deliberate despite the chronic back pain that always flared when I was stressed. In our closet, David's suitcase sat partially packed, hidden behind winter coats where he thought I'd never look. He'd been planning this expansion, this affair, this complete erasure of my business contributions for months. I opened my filing cabinet, the one he'd mocked as Sarah's obsessive organization for years, and pulled out the folder marked Business Formation Documents. Inside was the business registration from 5 years ago, when my grandmother died and left me the inheritance that would change our lives. The registration David had insisted I handle, since you're better with paperwork, while he focused on real business operations. My name, only my name listed as business owner, with David designated as operations manager. I'd never told him about the specific legal structure my grandmother's lawyer had recommended. David had signed the papers without reading them, too excited about launching his construction company to bother with boring legal details. But those legal details had protected my inheritance investment by making me sole proprietor of Mitchell Construction, with David as my employee. For 5 years, David had been working for me while assuming he owned everything, calling my strategic thinking, emotional interference, and my systematic documentation paperwork obsession. I photographed every document, the business registration, the bank account setup showing my ownership, the insurance policies, all listing Sarah Mitchell as sole proprietor. Then I pulled out another folder that would matter even more. 5 years of David's expense reports, each one signed and submitted to me for filing, including the recent reports showing construction equipment purchases that had actually been hotel stays with Jessica, restaurant bills for 2, and jewelry that had never appeared in our home. At 2 o'clock, I heard David's truck, then another engine. Through the window, I watched him open the passenger door for Jessica, who stepped out examining our business property like she already owned it. They had no idea the woman they planned to erase from her own success story was upstairs with 5 years of legal proof that David was just an employee taking credit for his boss's achievements. At Margaret Flynn's law office, she examined my business documents with the attention David had never given anything I considered important. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is absolutely ironclad. You're the sole proprietor," she said, adjusting her reading glasses as she reviewed the business registration. "Your husband has no legal ownership stake whatsoever. He's been telling everyone he built the company from nothing. Last night he announced expansion plans to our anniversary guests. Without consulting you? That's attempted fraud." Margaret leaned forward, her expression sharpening. "He can't expand a business he doesn't own." I showed her David's expense reports from the past 6 months, hotel stays with Jessica disguised as equipment purchases, romantic dinners listed as client meetings, jewelry receipts filed as business materials. "Remarkable documentation," Margaret noted. "What's your goal here, Sarah?" "I want him to face the truth he's been too arrogant to see for 5 years." At 1:30, I parked across from our construction site office, watching David pace excitedly as he waited for Jessica. A silver BMW arrived, Jessica stepping out like she owned the place David was about to show her. I waited until they were settled inside the trailer, before walking through the front door of my own business. "Excellent location for expansion," David was saying confidently to Jessica, who sat in my desk chair, reviewing property listings. "I've been building this company for 5 years. The growth potential is unlimited." Jessica looked up as I entered. "Oh, hi, Sarah. David was just showing me the expansion plans." "How interesting," I replied calmly, carrying a thick folder. "David, did you tell Jessica who actually owns Mitchell Construction?" David's confidence faltered slightly. "We own it together, Sarah. Don't confuse things with paperwork technicalities." I handed Jessica the business registration. "The technicality is that my name is the only one on the ownership documents." Jessica's eyes widened as she read. "This shows sole proprietorship by Sarah Mitchell." "David, your name isn't on here at all." David flushed, grabbing the document. "That's wrong. I've been running this business for 5 years. You've been managing operations," I corrected, pulling out another folder. "These are your employee expense reports, each one signed by you and submitted to me for approval." I spread 5 years of expense reports across my desk, each marked Employee Expense Report, each signed by David Mitchell in bold, confident handwriting. "You've been my employee for 5 years, David." Deafening silence filled the trailer. Jessica studied the documents with growing comprehension. "Mr. Mitchell, these are clearly employee documents," she said slowly. "You signed these as an employee requesting reimbursement from the business owner." David grabbed his most recent expense report from 3 weeks ago. In his own handwriting, the description read, "Business Expansion Research, D. Mitchell, Operations Manager." His face went white, reading his own words. "You wrote Operations Manager on an employee expense report while telling everyone you built this company from nothing." Jessica stared at David like she'd never seen him before. "You've been an employee this entire time?" I assumed." "You assumed," I agreed. 5 years of assuming that being a man who managed daily operations meant owning everything important. Never bothered to read what you signed." Jessica stood abruptly, gathering her purse. "You told me you owned this business. You promised we'd expand together." "I thought I did." "You thought?" Jessica's voice rose. "You've been living in complete fantasy for 5 years?" I played a recording from my phone, David's voice from this morning. "Sarah has no idea what this company is actually worth. She's never questioned anything about ownership." The silence was deafening. "Actually, I've always known exactly what my company is worth," I said quietly. "I just never corrected your assumptions." David slumped in his chair as 5 years of delusion collapsed around him. "What happens now?" he asked weakly. "Now you face the truth you've avoided for 5 years, David. You're my employee. You always have been." After Margaret left and Jessica fled, David sat staring at the employee expense reports scattered across my desk like they were written in a foreign language. 5 years of his own handwriting. 5 years of signing documents as operations manager, while believing himself to be the owner of Mitchell Construction. "This has to be a mistake," he said hollowly. "I've been making business decisions since we started." "Management decisions," I corrected, settling into my office chair. "You've been managing the operations of my company very effectively. I've always appreciated that about you as an employee." My chronic back pain had eased significantly. Amazing what clarity could do for stress-related inflammation. David picked up an expense report from last year, his signature bold at the bottom below his employee number. "I never read these forms carefully." "I know. You always said paperwork was boring, that you trusted me with details while you focused on important things." He looked up with something like recognition dawning. "You knew. All these years, you knew I thought I owned this business." "You never asked, David? In 5 years of partnership, you never once asked to see the business registration? You assumed that being the man running daily operations meant you owned everything important." My phone buzzed. I glanced and smiled. "Problem?" David asked nervously. "Jessica's asking if she can get her deposit back on the expansion property you promised her. She just discovered the deposit came from our business account." David went pale. "What deposit?" "The one you authorized yesterday for the property purchase. $15,000 from Mitchell Construction's expansion fund. I was planning to tell you." Tell the business owner about spending her company's money on property for your girlfriend? I interrupted gently. How thoughtful. David stood so quickly he knocked over his coffee. Liquid spreading across the employee handbook I'd given him 5 years ago. Probably the first time he'd looked at it since orientation. This is vindictive, Sarah. This isn't like you. I handed him paper towels, watching him frantically clean up. Perhaps you never really knew me, just like I apparently never really knew you. How long have you known about Jessica? 3 months. The hotel receipts you filed as equipment purchases were quite detailed. Why didn't you say anything? I studied this man I'd funded for 5 years, watching him discover that his entire professional identity had been built on a lie he'd created himself. I kept hoping you'd remember that I wasn't actually stupid, I said honestly. That eventually you'd read the business documents, wonder why we never dealt with business partners as co-owners, notice that all legal correspondence came addressed to me alone. I was protecting you from complicated business stuff. You were protecting yourself from acknowledging that your wife might know things you didn't. My phone rang. Margaret with updates about the deposit recovery and Jessica's property scheme. The expansion property purchase has been blocked, I announced after hanging up. Jessica's deposit will be returned to our business account. Also, I've frozen your company credit card pending a full expense audit. David heard everything. His shoulders sagged as another piece of his expansion dream crumbled. You've been planning this for months, he said quietly. I've been documenting your behavior for months. The planning started when you called my business contributions playing our role at our anniversary. What happens now? Now you decide whether you want to continue as my operations manager or find employment elsewhere. Where am I supposed to go? You have excellent construction management experience. 5 years of proven success that should transfer well to other companies. David looked at me with something between respect and fear. I never realized you were so calculating. I prefer thorough. A skill from 5 years managing details you couldn't be bothered with. 2 weeks after David moved into the extended stay hotel, I was reviewing quarterly reports when my sister Maria called. Sarah, you're the talk of the Contractors Association meeting. Everyone's asking about David's employment situation at Mitchell Construction. Word was spreading exactly as I'd hoped. What's the general reaction? Shock, admiration, and a lot of business owners asking their wives to double-check their partnership documents. That afternoon, I received a call from Bob Johnson. Sarah, Linda and I feel terrible about the anniversary dinner. We should have said something when David took all the credit. You looked uncomfortable. That was enough. We had no idea you actually owned the entire business. David always acted like he was the entrepreneur. He managed operations exceptionally well. There's a difference between management and ownership. Saturday morning, the monthly contractors networking breakfast arrived, the same industry gathering where David and I had been fixtures for 3 years. I'd considered skipping, but decided it was time to face our professional community directly. I walked into the Marriott conference room, carrying my laptop and the quarterly reports David used to present. Conversations quieted as I entered, then resumed with obvious intensity. Bob Johnson approached first. Sarah, we wanted to apologize again for not speaking up at your anniversary. It's forgotten, Bob. Linda Johnson joined us, her face flushed with embarrassment. We keep thinking about David saying he built the business from nothing when you actually funded everything. Most assumptions about women's business contributions are wrong, I said simply. But how did he not know for 5 years? Bob asked, genuinely baffled. Employee expense reports? He never read what he signed, assumed that managing operations meant ownership. A small crowd was gathering now. The same contractors who'd watched David present his company's success stories, who'd heard him dismiss my contributions as paperwork support. Is it true he tried to expand without consulting you? Asked Carol from Precision Electrical. He attempted to purchase property using business funds, without owner authorization. Nervous laughter rippled through the group. Tom Williams, David's golfing partner, looked uncomfortable. Where's David working now? Still in transition, adjusting to employee status at other companies. This is unbelievable, said Janet Foster, who'd known us since we started. David always bragged about his entrepreneurial vision and business ownership. He was very confident about his role, I agreed diplomatically. You must have been planning this revelation for months, Linda said admiringly. I was documenting behavior for months. The confrontation started when he publicly erased my business contributions at our anniversary. The group fell silent, remembering that exact moment. We all heard him, Bob admitted quietly. None of us knew how to respond. You respond by remembering that women who handle paperwork and maintain filing systems usually understand exactly what they own. At that moment, David walked into the conference room. He stopped short when he saw me surrounded by our entire professional network, clearly discussing his employment situation. His face went completely white as 30 pairs of eyes turned toward him. Sarah, he said weakly, approaching with obvious reluctance. I didn't know you'd be here. Monthly networking breakfast, I replied calmly. Same as always. The silence was deafening. Everyone knew. David's carefully constructed identity as a successful business owner had become common knowledge as an employee who'd deluded himself for 5 years. How's the job search going? Tom asked, trying to break the tension. David's hands started shaking slightly. It's challenging. Most companies want to verify previous ownership claims. The weight of his public humiliation settled over the room like a thick blanket. Well, I said gently, I'm always happy to provide employment references for your management skills. 6 weeks later, I stood in my newly redesigned office, reviewing the final quarterly reports as sole proprietor of Mitchell Construction. David had signed all transfer documents without contest, accepting that he'd never owned any part of the business he'd claimed to build from nothing. The transformation felt complete. Gone were the generic motivational posters David had preferred for professional atmosphere. Gone was the stark utilitarian furniture he'd insisted projected serious business image. My office finally looked like a space where the actual owner worked. My phone rang. Emma, my daughter, calling from her marketing job in Charlotte. Mom, I just saw the industry article about Mitchell Construction's expansion under new leadership. I can't believe how confident you sound in the interview. Different how? You actually sound like you own a business now, instead of just supporting someone else's dream. That observation cut deeper than I'd expected. How long had I been operating as a supporting character in my own company's story? How are you feeling about everything? Emma asked gently. Empowered, I said honestly. For the first time in 5 years, completely in control of my own business. After we hung up, I walked through my office, really seeing it. The walls displayed my marketing coordinator certifications alongside the business registration, showing my sole proprietorship. The filing cabinet contained my systematic expense tracking that had prevented countless financial problems David never noticed. Every corner told the story of a woman who'd finally stopped pretending her employee was her business partner. My doorbell rang. Margaret Flynn stood outside with a bottle of champagne and updated legal documents. Congratulations, Sarah. It's official. All expansion plans are under your sole authority, and the expense audit is complete. David's personal purchases total $37,000, which he'll be repaying through payroll deduction at his new job, I said, inviting her inside. How's he adjusting to actual employee status elsewhere? According to Tom Williams, he's struggling. Turns out, when you've never actually been responsible for business ownership, management-only roles feel like a demotion. We opened the champagne on my office balcony overlooking the construction yard. My construction yard, with my equipment, operated by my employees. Any word on Jessica? Margaret asked. She's dating a real business owner now, someone who actually has his name on ownership documents. And how do you feel about that? I considered the question seriously. I feel sorry for David, not because he lost me, but because he spent 5 years managing a business he never bothered to actually understand. That's remarkably gracious. I'm not being gracious, I'm being honest. David fell in love with the idea of being an entrepreneur. He never fell in love with the work of actually owning a business. Margaret raised her glass to knowing the difference. As evening settled over my construction yard, I felt the profound satisfaction of a woman who'd finally stopped accepting less credit than she deserved. David's delusion had become my clarity. His assumptions had become my advantages. His 5-year fantasy of business ownership had become my liberation from playing supporting roles in my own success story. In reclaiming what had always been mine, I'd discovered something far more valuable than business ownership. I'd found the confidence to never again let someone else take credit for my work. The woman who'd once managed David's ego had become something much more powerful, a business owner who belonged entirely to herself. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities, new decisions, new chances to build the business my way. Tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, in control of my own empire,